Prynhawn and croeso. Good afternoon and welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this Cardiff University event. We have a wide variety of people joining us today from across the UK and around the globe. Swansea, Shanghai and Swindon, to name a few. This is the latest in our For Alumni by Alumni live event series, where we hand over the webcams and mics to our fabulous alumni to share their thoughts, expertise, passions and experiences on topics which will inspire, engage and spark curiosity within our community. This event is being recorded and we'll send you the link in our follow-up email. So my name is Hannah Sterritt. I am the Alumni and Supporter Engagement Officer at Cardiff University and fellow alumna, and it is my privilege to introduce you to today's panellist. Dr Dean Burnett is a neuroscientist, lecturer, author, blogger, podcaster, pundit, science communicator and comedian. Previously employed as a psychiatry tutor and lecturer at the Cardiff University Centre for Medical Education, Dean is currently an honorary research associate at Cardiff University School of Psychology, as well as a visiting industry fellow at Birmingham City University. However, Dean is also a full-time author, previously known for his satirical science column, Brain Flapping at The Guardian, which ran from 2012 to 2018. This led to his internationally acclaimed best-selling debut book, The Idiot Brain, which has resulted in several further books, including Psychological, where mental health goes wrong and how to make sense of it, published this year, which reveals what is actually going on in our brains when we suffer mental health issues such as anxiety, depression and addiction. Before we get into our topic, I'd just like to remind our audience that if you have any questions for discussion this evening, please enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And please, in your answer, let us know where in the world you are right now. I also thank everyone who has already submitted questions in advance, which I'll ask during the Q&A section of the evening. So welcome, Dean. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And it's lovely to have you, I suppose, with Cardiff University, sharing your insights into this very important topic. So welcome.
Thank you, much appreciated. Happy to be here virtually, like you said.
So how was your time at Cardiff, if we start off with that?
Well, it's fine. Technically, I'm still here. I mean, I've never actually left Cardiff. I moved down when I was 18 and have remained in the area ever since. I'm not, some people say you need to broaden your horizons and travel further afield. So I grew up in a small mining valley. So people say broaden your horizons, but my horizons as I grew up were 3 miles apart. So anything more than that is, I can take or leave it. So, yeah, I mean, I've always liked Cardiff. It was a very, people sort of laugh at me a bit thinking, well, you didn't go far from home, but I do think it's a genuinely great place to live and study. I felt that from the very first time I came to the open day. So I went to obviously applied to several universities, even Cambridge, which was a baffling and terrible idea, it turns out, to Swansea and Bristol and things like that. But when it came to Cardiff, I just felt at home, felt intrigued. I felt like the setup was great. Just ticked a lot of boxes I didn't know I had, and I studied here in my undergraduate neuroscience degree, and then worked for the university as a anatomy technician, embalming cadavers at the medical school, which is as bad as it sounds. And then did my PhD for the psychology department, and then worked as a psychiatry lecturer. So, yeah, I've really I've spent a lot of time with the university and in the city. So, yeah, it's a big part of who I am and my life story, really. So, yeah, I'm obviously a big fan.
Fantastic. There's so many Cardiff affiliations there. I mean, how did your interest in neuroscience develop alongside your experiences of Cardiff as a city and also getting into comedy?
A strange sort of tapestry in terms of how I ended up being a neuroscientist. I think the Burnetts are a well-known family in my home village, but they're not, they're a bit salubrious. They're a bit more enthusiastic, bombastic, open, and they sing and dance and play sport and stuff. But I was never like that. I was always the quiet, shy, geeky kid. I lived in a pub. My parents were the landlords, so that was a very strange environment to find someone like me in. I guess I was wondering, why am I like this? Why am I, why am I so different from the rest of my family and friends and stuff? And then just got intrigued by why am I so odd in terms of my peer group, and ended up thinking it must be something to do with, I must have a different brain or something. And that's the very first glimmer of interest in brain-based things. And although I was talking about recently, I think my first ever sort of realization that I have this interest was when Robocop 2 came out, and it was I was getting ready for school. It was on GMTV, and the film critic Paul Gambaccini was talking about it, and he was very disparaging of the film. It isn't very good. And he said it's gratuitous. There's a scene where Robocop karate chops a brain. And that concept has really freaked me out. I remember having dreams about it last night, about someone going around karate chopping brains, and I woke up going, no, I can't do that. So I just think I had this innate sort of fascination with and protection for brains from a very early age. And yeah, it's sort of snowballed from there, really. And you know, I did all sciences in school. I was never, my school wasn't a prestigious school. I appreciate it. They did the best they could, but it was oversubscribed, underfunded in a economically deprived area. And it was known as a rough school. I was in it because of pure catchment, but I can tell people my school was the one school in the area that you got sent to if you got kicked out of all the others for being, hellraiser. And if you got kicked out of my school, you had to get a job or live in the woods, and a lot of very crowded woods where I lived. And to give you an example of how atypical I was, I guess, the year I did my A-levels, I did 3 sciences and history at school. So if you added up the school of over 1,000 students, if you add up the A-level, the physics, chemistry, biology students, you got 7 students, 3 of whom were me, because I was the only one doing 3 sciences. So like I was represented half the school's science output, but I got a lot of support for that, because the school scores would go down if I got a bad mark. I got encouraged, and teachers said that you should really keep at this because it helps them, but they were very supportive and pushed me to do science at university, which wasn't even a thing I considered, because it wasn't something from my family history I had any experience with. And so I applied to different courses, just general science, but then Cardiff had the neuroscience course. I was, oh yeah, that's the whole brain thing. And I came here and sort of open day, I was on the lab, and one of the professors just pulled a brain out of a bucket. It's a brain. I was like, didn't realize you could do that. I didn't know that was a thing that could happen. So that was just like, this is for me. Yeah, I'm definitely coming here to do stuff like that. And yeah, I think, as I got here, and it was pure coincidence and fluke on my part, but neuroscience sort of became more of a mainstream popular thing. It is and remains quite fashionable. I mean, it's very applicable to people's lives and the wider world. But like as I was here, like I saw, they built the Kubrick lab with all the scanners and things, and they expanded the departments, built the new Bioscience 3 building. So it felt like I was on I was in at the ground floor or something. So it's always been my enthusiasm, and I've maintained it ever since. But I was never the best researcher. I think I'm a big fan of brains. I love talking about them. I love discussing and telling people, but I'm not actually that adept at doing the actual research because I don't focus very well. But then I like to do the entertaining stuff too. That's part of my family history, and started joining the stand-up comedy circuit in Cardiff, which is very small, still is really, because it's a small city. And so I thought I always wanted to do that, but I was always too scared, too intimidated by the very notion. But then I got that job working embalming cadavers for a year and a half, and I think one thing changes your standards of what you put up with. It's handling dead bodies all day, every day for best part of 2 years. And I've been thinking, I'll try stand-up, because even if I tell my jokes, no one laughs. They're still breathing, and that's actually a step up from my day job. So I got into it, and then it became another hobby, enthusiasm of mine. But I always preferred writing the material than actually performing it. So and then I discovered that blogging was a thing. So I became someone who blogged humorously about science, particularly neuroscience, which is kind of applicable in any situation. So my career ended up in this very weird, very weird path, which I couldn't tell anyone else to replicate, because I don't know how you go about doing that now. But it's all thanks to being part of the Cardiff scene, and Cardiff environment. I think the comedy scene, because it was such a small scene, and because it was the same people coming to lots of the same gigs, then you had to write more to turn your material over. Like in London, I've said you can actually be on this comedy scene, you can have 10 minutes of material, you can take that around all the different gigs for like a year and a half before you write anything new, whereas you couldn't do that here. So it sort of, Cardiff made me into a prolific writer just by sheer necessity. So I'll always be grateful for that as well.
Fantastic. So our topic of conversation is, where's your head at? The science behind our mental health. So could you share what your motivations for writing your latest book were, and the context behind its release?
So I never actually set out to be a mental health writer, but that seems to be what I've become by default. Just like that's where I've been sort of nudged to in that direction. Came out largely by accident because I was writing for The Guardian whilst I was a psychiatry lecturer for the MSc Psychiatry programme in the Cardiff Medical School. But it was originally agreed that my role in the Cardiff, in the Guardian science blog network would be a sort of, I don't say jester, but close enough, as if other people would do the serious scientific takes on serious matters or topical things, and I would do the light stuff, do the wry takes or the spoofy things and so on. And it worked. I mean, I got a lot of traffic for it because people just liked it. It's harmless, it's fun. There's no it's easy to read and things like that. So I thought that was my job. I'd bring the traffic in when everyone else did the proper stuff. But then came to work one morning and it just, the news had broken that Robin Williams had died by suicide. And as you'd expect, whenever someone, high profile takes their own life, there's always a lot of visceral reaction from various parties. And already, like, it was 9 a.m, but it obviously happened in US time. And people say, like, oh, it's just so selfish to do that. How could he be so selfish to have done this to his family and to his fans and so on? And that's not how it works. It turned out later he had Lewy body dementia, which is much of a different thing. But even soon, he had depression because of all his previous history, and he struggled with mental health a lot. He was always open about that. And I thought, well, that's not how depression works. It's not selfish. It's, if anything, it's selfless. You think you're such a terrible person and things are going so badly, you want to remove yourself from the equation to spare people the pain of your existence. And that's how it works. It's not like someone going, oh, I can't put up with this, I'm going to cause other people pain. There's nothing like that at all. And I thought, well, someone in the media should be saying that. And then I went, oh, I've got a Guardian, I could say that. I just literally 90 minutes to explain that it's not selfish, this is how it works, here's why that's wrong, here's why it's harmful to do that. But I said to them, I said, look, if you just put it up, I know we won't get any traction because there's loads of articles today about Robin Williams. And they said, yeah, okay, just more the merrier. And it ended up being the most popular piece I ever wrote, and definitely the most popular piece they had about Robin Williams that day. I guess it was, I struck a nerve that I didn't realize so many people were waiting for someone to say that. So I did, and therefore got like several million hits that 1 week and took my book career in that direction. But I've always been, like, people just like how I write about mental health. And I like writing about it. Also, I'm a psychiatry lecturer and teacher and stuff. So I like to think I have the insight and the approach to do so, thanks to my time at Cardiff. And I've written other books which touch on mental health or involved in various ways, but never really focused on it as the sole subject for a book before. But I wanted to, but my agent and publisher said, like, we're sure it would be a good book, but in the publishing industry, the focus is now currently on mental health memoirs, or books of mental health are always from someone who's gone through it, who had their own experiences and they take away from it or how they cope with it and stuff, which is arguably as it should be. The conversation should be patient-led, as they say, but I still think there was scope or space for a technical perspective. And people like, yeah, we all know, mental health awareness is a big thing. It's Mental Health Awareness Week or month at the moment, or both simultaneously, I don't know. And awareness is great, but that's not the end of the story. You can say people like depression's real, anxiety is real, and they go, yeah, okay. Where do you go from there? That doesn't tell you how it works, what to do about it. So I think there was more scope for something to help mental health understanding, in terms of, scientifically speaking, what is these mental health disorders? Why do they happen? What's going on in our brains? What can we do about it? Why do the things we have to treat it work the way they do, or not work, as this case may be? So I think that would help demystify, destigmatize it, and give people a bit more, make it more tangible, so people can't just dismiss it as a made-up thing. And that's what I wanted to write. And then, as it happened, Audible, the audiobook company, came to me because my first book still going really well for them, and they said, we'd like to do something original for you, like Netflix got into original programming. And I said, yeah, that sounds great, I'll do that. And I said, what do you want to write? I said, well, I'd like to do some about mental health. They were very keen on that, and they commissioned the book first. So it was actually my explanation of mental health things, but it was actually an audiobook released 2019. But when it's been out for a year, then my regular publishers, FABA, said, well, we'd like to turn it into a print book. So it's great, let's do that as well. And I updated it and tweaked it for a bit more of a post-pandemic vibe to it. And that's the book we've got now, really. So yeah, it's a technical slash, it's an explainer of mental health, as in why these things exist, why we have these problems, and what it is that's happening to us when we experience these seemingly intangible things. So yeah, that's where I was coming from with the whole book.
Fantastic. I suppose for me, your use of analogy throughout your book was really useful in interpreting the challenging concepts of, that can be or is of neuroscience and mental health. So what would your favourite analogy be for a mental health concept?
I got two that I actually really quite like that I've come up with that I like to use when I can. The one thing I referred to the other day was like it's when it comes to addiction, it's the chapter I dedicate to, because I think of all the mental health problems, addiction probably still has the most stigma freighted to it, and therefore making it clearer should be perhaps more helpful, more urgently. So like, I think people think addiction is a case of you got no willpower. If you like this drug, then you just stop taking it, and if you don't, then you're weak. I mean, there are a lot of people who think that, and that's unhelpful, but it's just the way of the world. So try to explain why it's not that simple. Why it's not just a simple case of you just stop taking that thing you like, show some discipline, and introduce the concept of the stadium in the brain, because drugs affect the reward pathway, the pleasure producing circuit in the deep center of the brain, where every sense of pleasure comes from. When they say things like cheese activates the same part of the brain as drugs, or falling in love activates the same part of the brain as drugs, it's kind of an unhelpful thing to say, because yes, drugs work on those parts of the brain, but that's because that's where pleasure happens in the brain. They're not the drug center of the brain. It's sort of like, I find it very it's like saying someone, you took money at the bank, that's what bank robbers do. It's, well, yes, but that's banks don't exist for the purpose of bank robbery, and so on and so on. So that's an aside, but it's something I'm quite annoyed by. That's why I wanted to write this one. And so I created the stadium in the brain. So imagine if there was imagine a small town, a small independent, kind of self-sustained rural town with like a town hall where stuff happens occasionally, occasional shows and live music nights, and the community around it. So far, so good. Seems like a perfectly normal setup. Then one day, overnight, somehow, a stadium appears right in the center of the town where the town hall was, and with loads of big events and gigs packed, scheduled for it, and people just descend upon the town. Thousands of people to come and see these things. Obviously, that's going to affect the town in that suddenly they're swamped by all these new people coming in, and it's good for them in many ways. These people are buying everything from the shops, they're booking up all the hotels and the rooms, the Airbnbs, and spending all their money everywhere, and so providing custom and support. And so it's good for the town that way, but the town's also kind of overwhelmed because they're not set up for this. People are going to clog the roads. There's no enough police and security around, and so on and so on. So, if the stadium's going to stay there, the town needs to adapt. So they build better road systems, they employ more police, and schedule things to happen, and like build more restaurants and more hotels and more, more support systems for the stadium thing. And that's good. So, but then it gets to the point where the town itself is now dependent on the stadium because it's got all this extra stuff around it. Because of that, now it's become part of the whole town's infrastructure. And then, on another night, just randomly, the stadium disappears. The town hall is back. That's okay, it's weird, but that doesn't mean the town instantly goes back the way it was before. Now it's got all this extra stuff that needs to be sustained, but the town hall can't do that. And therefore things are going to start collapsing, like people are going to become bankrupt and destitute, and there's going to be chaos because all these things set up aren't happening anymore. And so the town's going to be seriously harmed by this. And that's essentially what's happening in the brain when you got an addiction. The drug is, say, a powerful drug like a heroin or something, is the appearance of a stadium. The brain's going like, whoa, what the hell? What is this? But if it stays there, the brain adapts to it because it's a new thing. You can't just ignore it. It's sort of like, I guess we got this to deal with now, so I'm going to set up everything. I'm going to rejig things to make it so we can cope with this. And then to take the drug away, the brain doesn't revert back to its original state. It's been changed since, and that change requires this drug to be present. If it's not, then it causes problems. And that's sort of like I think that's the most profound or the most helpful analogy that comes to explaining addiction. Another one I do like in the book, though, is trying to explain the differences and similarities between mental and physical health problems, because it's very common and very almost like a default thing to say mental health is just like physical health, or mental illness is just like physical illness, which can be helpful if you're trying to get people to understand and appreciate that it's, it's a tangible, real thing to be concerned about. But it can also be unhelpful if you're trying to get to the specifics or how to deal with these things or what do you expect from them. Like sort of, I made the comparison, it's like saying a frog is like a dog. Now, it sounds similar. They're like creatures found in Britain, 4 legs, or found on farms, and if you've never seen a dog before, then saying it looks like a big, tall, furry frog would sort of make some sort of sense. But then if you got a frog and then thought it was a dog and took it home and gave it dog biscuits and kept it in a nice warm bed, you'd have a dead frog pretty soon, because the differences are just as important as the similarities. And I think that's one thing which can be overlooked a lot in the modern discourse, that yes, mental health problems are like physical ones in a lot of ways, but in many ways they're also quite different. And overlooking or ignoring that perhaps isn't the most helpful approach.
It's fantastic. I haven't thought about either of those concepts in the same way. So it's really interesting to hear concepts we understand or potentially understand being applied to that. So that's really useful. Thank you.
No problem.
I know we touched on this very briefly already, but it is Mental Health Awareness Month this month, and one focus of your book is reviewing how effective the current efforts at raising mental health awareness are, and that awareness doesn't necessarily equal understanding. So how do you think mental health awareness has helped, and where do we go next?
It definitely have been improvements that I've seen since I started writing, both in my own personal blogs and the Guardian blogs and books and stuff. I've noticed a sort of tangible change in how mental health is talked about and discussed. People are far more willing and able to now say, I have depression. It's something I struggle with a lot. It's obviously still takes a lot for them to do that, but it's not some sort of like, you seldom get people who meet it with scorn and doubt as much as you once would have done. And I think that also is reflected in the media as well. There is a lot less now of mainstream articles which would say things like there's no such thing as depression, it's just people attention seeking, which you used to get to see quite often. People like, it's all this new snowflake generation, they're all just so pampered, they don't know what real suffering is, blah blah blah, that usual guff. And you don't get that so much now. I mean, you still get the angry pundits, but you get the discussions sort of shifted more to, well, depression's real, but antidepressants are just a con. And they've sort of fallen back a bit to try and dig the heels in and fight a different battleground, which does show progress. At least like mental health being a thing is accepted more than it was. And I can only think that's to do with the awareness campaigns, especially get them into schools and stuff and teens and about them very early. And the internet has helped. And people have, we have these campaigns where people can reach out and say, hey, I'm struggling. And sympathetic strangers who have the same problem will be there. You can contact them and just have a discussion with them, or just feel accepted by such people straight away. And I think that's all to the good. That's very good there. Where do we go next? I think, like we said, I think we should start promoting and emphasizing the actual understanding more, the specifics, because there are problems with what's happened as well, in that people have an awareness of mental health and they will use it in unhelpful or counterproductive ways. Like I've written about this when Donald Trump was first elected president, or got the nomination president, whichever one it was. There were so many people saying, no, he needs to have a mental health test. He's clearly mentally incapable. He's clearly mentally unwell. He shouldn't be allowed to be president. And I found that really worrying, because as much as whatever you think about Donald Trump, even a professional psychiatrist shouldn't be diagnosing him from afar based on the stuff you see on telly. Diagnosis is a very rich and complex and difficult process, and it changes over time. Just catching a few TV glimpses of someone isn't nearly enough to do that. But the idea that you can just look at someone and say, oh, they got mental health problems, is not a good thing, I think, because also it promoted the idea that he is awful, therefore he must be mentally unwell. Because you can have a completely clean bill of mental health and still be an awful, awful person. The link in the two is really unhelpful to those who have to struggle with their own issues, as well as being thrown under the bus. And also, I thought then it was also a scapegoat, as in, yes, he's racist, he's bigoted, he's stuff, and he does all these things, but he's got mental health problems. So that's why that is. So we aren't going to change anything. We aren't going to analyze why people have these attitudes and stuff. So yeah, it was both like a scapegoat and stigmatizing. So I think it was really bad. But on the more mundane level, you get people now saying, oh, tidy up. I'm a little bit OCD. You're not a little bit OCD. I don't think you can be a little bit OCD. You are picky. You like things being straight, like things being neat, which is fine. That's fine. But if you want that, you tell people that, like, can you tie that up? But they don't claim to have a mental health problem just to get your own way about stuff. They also get people now who are saying, "Oh, I must be on the spectrum because you're rude, because you're not being kind to people." Like, that's not an excuse. You can't just self-diagnose that you have a problem because you don't observe social etiquette. I think people are aware of these terms. They don't understand what they mean. They apply them far too liberally and far too candidly. And even when it's meant in a good way, it's like Instagram campaigns like everyone needs to take a self-care day, or I'm turning my profile blue for awareness. And okay, yeah, but this doesn't really help much. Like, I think you're just, there's more, it seems more like, I'm also a nice person, by the way, because I care about this, but don't challenge me in any of it. And so, yeah, I think awareness is great, but it means a lot of it's been co-opted and applied in often less than helpful ways. So, yeah, I think more understanding is perhaps the next best thing we could be doing.
That's really interesting. I suppose we're thinking about this topic in a bit more detail. The dialogue has definitely changed over the past at least 5 years, and of course so much more since then. So those examples you've given are really helpful in actually looking back and saying, oh, these are issues that we haven't really been talking about, but maybe we're not necessarily talking about them in the right way still. So definitely the understanding, I completely agree with that.
Cool.
So kind of moving on to our next question that we actually had submitted in advance was, do you think that COVID-19 has created new mental health issues in certain people, or just exposed underlying issues which have always existed?
I'm going to say it's almost certainly going to be both, because we're talking the whole population of the planet has been made to live through these times of pandemic and lockdown and so on and so on. And that's a lot of people. So you'll have some people who were perhaps just getting by or just managing, and then this tipped them over the edge. And some people who are fine otherwise and who have now been hit hard by the stress of it all, to the point where they are mentally compromised to the extent that they might be genuinely unwell. It's really hard to pin down what it was first. I mean, there's something called the stress vulnerability model in psychiatry, where certain people, because of how their lives have been, because of all the things they've experienced, how they've developed, have smaller or bigger, lesser or greater ability to handle stress. Once your ability to handle stress is maxed out, any more stress then means you can no longer function. Your brain doesn't have the ability to maintain an even keel, and you become unwell. If you had a hard life, your brain's capacity to absorb stress is already quite kind of full, or like 2/3 full, so you can't handle much more, and so on. So yeah, there will be plenty of people like that who have handled this much stress, and then the pandemic stopped up to here, so they went spill over the side. But there's also been some reports of people with things like depression, anxiety, who have found the pandemic has improved their mental health, which is weird to say when you think about it like that. But I think you got to look at it from some people have it summarized as depression. Anxiety is the constant fear that the worst will happen. Depression is the feeling that the worst has happened. But those are typically mental constructs, and they aren't true, because you're anxious about, and for unspecified reasons, you're depressed when you shouldn't be. But when there's a pandemic going on, both of those feelings are sort of validated. That people when people with anxiety are saying, "See, right, good. No, I never liked going outside because I was too anxious, but now we can't do that. I always felt bad because I felt sad for no reason, but now I'm feeling sad because of the pandemic on." And it's sort of not so much an excuse, but it sort of makes you feel like, yes, like, well, my feelings are valid now. They've been validated. They've been justified, and that makes people feel better. Feel like at least I'm not alone anymore. My response isn't illogical and irrational. I actually do feel like this is a warranted response to what's going on around us. Pardon me. So there are some people who have found the pandemic conditions to be helpful, particularly those with anxiety problems. And it's at least in the early days, it was helpful for teenagers too, it seems, because a lot of teenagers are particularly vulnerable to mental health problems because of all the brain developments they're going through. And the things that stress them out are things like fear of missing out and peer approval and disrupted sleep, because teenagers need most of it at different times, but they can't get it because of the school schedules and so on. So pandemic sort of took care of all these things. It removed a lot of constant stresses from a teenager's life. You can't be afraid you're being excluded when no one's doing anything. there's no point in waking up early to go to school. When you're not going to school, you're doing homeschooling. So yeah, so like there was like the teenage population didn't show the anticipated, or at least the similar drop in mental health that other people did, at least early on. I mean, there's still so much data about this. We are still unpicking it all, but those are the original things we found, and they do make a certain sense when you know how the brain works and stuff. So yeah, there's so many things that the pandemic has done to people's mental health that you're going to get something for everyone, really, in a bad way, because that's not good.
It's really interesting to reflect on it like that, because of course we're still in the pandemic. I suppose there's still things that aren't back to normal, if you will, and I'm sure there'll be lessons learned from that, but it's very interesting seeing the observations, but of course in 5 years' time what the data will show as well. So it's really interesting. I suppose relating to that, where do you draw the line between mental health and mental ill health?
Yeah, that is actually a big sort of problem. It's not it's a constant issue in like the world of psychiatry, because the human body, as complex as it is and baffling as it can be, it is kind of consistent. I think I mentioned in the book that a heart attack now is the same as a heart attack in Roman times. Like someone who lived in the 1300s had the same body shape and the same body temperature as someone from like modern day New York. So the body is at least consistent, and you can look at it and it's easy to tell when it's gone wrong. So if you see someone and they like leaking black fluid from every orifice, or their elbows in the wrong direction, I think that's not right. That's just, we should do something about that, because that's clearly wrong. It's not always that straightforward. Plenty of physical problems don't have, it's really hard to find what the underlying cause is, because the body's a really complex system, and something happens over here can affect something over there, because the way downstream effects and so on. But by and large, it's consistent, so you can tell when something's going wrong with it. And we don't have that with our minds, because there's no set boundary to it. There are no sort of regulated sets of behaviors which we all instinctively stick to and agree are essential. Like, things change over time. Like I mentioned the book, in the 1970s, that was when homosexuality was declassified as a mental illness. It was a genuinely medically recognized mental disorder. I mean, it never should have been. We know that now. No, it's not anymore. Now we have same-sex marriage, which is increasingly common, which is great. But at the time, the social norm said that, okay, so most people are straight. So if you're not straight, then must be something wrong with you. And over time, we've expanded our our worldview and our sort of consensus of what humans are capable of and should do and shouldn't be doing. But because they're all based on societal norms, societal expectations, they can shift and change over time. Like in ancient Greece, homosexuality wasn't even really a thing. It was just another part of life. It didn't even have a separate definition, as far as I'm aware. So there wouldn't have been that issue then. But since then, we've gone in different directions, should we say? And so things change over time. Like the DSM and the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual and the International Classification of Diseases, the two sort of big texts which list all recognized mental health problems, they're constantly being revised and changed and adapted because societies change. And exactly what counts as a mental disorder means, like, how far do you deviate from the norm? And it's really hard to pin that down a lot of the time, because the norm keeps changing. And if someone was constantly poisoning themselves, would you say they were mentally unwell? Then technically yes. But if it's alcohol, which is officially a poison, it's not mentally well. That's totally normal. It's expected in British culture, at least. So that's not a thing. So if someone was talking to a green space alien that no one else could see, they think, okay, this person has issues. Whereas if someone was talking to God, like they said, I'm talking to God, I'm praying, then that's fine, because that's religion. And that's not classified differently. So people aren't 100% logical, 100% reliable, and we have to work out what should be going in the mind based on how they behave, how they express, how they compare to other people. And where that line is drawn is a big point of contention for lots of people. There's some people who are quite rigorous to say, no, anything which affects your functioning or anything which sort of makes you negative in any way should be treated and refined and therapy out of existence. And there are those who argue that there's no such thing as poor mental health. Not that they deny that depression's a thing. They say, no, all these mental health problems that we recognize are actually valid expressions of mentality based on the world around us. The world's horrible. Of course you should be depressed. That's a natural thing to do. And that is, I don't necessarily agree with that, because I think the argument that there's no such thing as bad mental health, it's all valid and logical, suggests that the human brain can never go wrong. And if someone's been a neuroscientist for like 20 odd years, I'm going to assure you it does very often. So yeah, but no, a lot of people fall between those two extremes. And yeah, so it is hard to pin down. It's constantly being revised and looked at, and that's something we have to keep an eye on. And who knows what in 20 years' time we think of a disorder now will not be recognized as such, or what we think of as normal now will be thinking, oh, that was never a good idea. So yeah, it keeps changing. There's no set line. It's a constant struggle to pin it down.
Fantastic. So we've had two questions that are reasonably similar, so I'll ask them kind of as a so a question we've had is, any tips and tricks on how we can make our brain listen to us? But also, what advice do you have to help people strengthen their resilience and well-being in relation to our mental health?
I think it's the whole thing about your brain listening to you. Like, how much control do you want over the subconscious systems? I mean, I think some would argue, I'm writing a book about it now, essentially, that there's no sort of set boundary, or like no clear distinction between the conscious self and the unconscious self. They overlap so much, and there's so much to do. Like the emotional systems, people sort of have this idea, like the scientists shouldn't be emotional, it should be totally rational at all times, and emotions are like an evolutionary holdover, but they're not. They're a fundamental part of who we are, and they influence us way more than most people expect and think. They're just sort of they are like the mortar of the house that is our brain. And yeah, so the idea of sort of coaching the rest of your brain to do what you want, it doesn't quite work like that, because so much of what comes from that part of the brain influences your consciousness and directs your thoughts. So obviously that's the whole thing about mindfulness, self-awareness, just like stopping and thinking about what you're doing. That tends to be useful, because emotions are fast. Emotions are very rapid, and the conscious thought, even though it's more complex, just takes a bit longer, because it's like emotions are like pressing a button, and complex thought is like doing a calculation. They're both kind of quick, but one's much faster than the other one. So if you just stop, before you react to things, stop and think about it. It's hard to do sometimes, but just being aware that it's something you can do can be quite helpful. I've found like being a neuroscientist helped me a lot, thinking, look, I'm in this mood about this now. Why am I feeling like this? It's because X, Y, Z, or like, I'm feeling this now, but I know that I won't feel like this soon enough. So no point in acting on it. I'll just try and ride it out. Obviously, situations will vary and so on and so on. So it's hard to say, train your brain to do anything, because it is you. You are your brain. It's not a separate entity. And what was the second one about resilience? Yeah. Same thing, really, I guess, in that being more aware of what's happening to you, why you're thinking this, why you're feeling this. I found that to be quite helpful, because it makes sense, and a lot of mental health therapies do seem to center around making your feelings more tangible. Even when it comes to like mindfulness, of thinking about why are you thinking this thought, why are you doing that, or a lot of new technological stuff involves extrapolating someone's emotional state or mental state and giving it a physical representation, like on a screen or a software avatar. And that tends to make it easy to do. It feels like a sense of control, as in you've got a sense of autonomy about it. You can recognize it as something specific rather than just this nebulous feeling or like mental part of your psyche. So yeah, being aware of what's going on in your head, why you react to things like you do, I can find that can be very helpful in a sort of resilient sort of way. So that would be my general go-to response to that.
That's great. Okay, we've probably got time for two more questions. So I'll ask this one, which is the current corporate obsession with well-being just an attempt to devolve responsibility to the unwell individual?
I have expressed similar thoughts in the past in various areas. There are, I've heard lots of people report, but there are seemingly a number of companies and employees out there who are genuinely taking it seriously. I think, obviously, mental health is important. How do we stop our staff being mentally unwell because of work? And that should be applauded. And obviously, you could say, you could be cynical, say, I bet they don't. But even from a cynical perspective, it's good to have your staff have good mental health and mental well-being and not be stressed about coming to work, because then they work better, they do more stuff, they produce more and earn you more money, and they don't cost you as much without health problems on the line. So it makes economic sense to do that. But yeah, there are plenty of employers out there. I mean, I've heard from a lot of doctors, not specified any particular organization, but a lot of doctors have said that it's like it's a very stressful job, very demanding job, and very high pressure job. And so they get a lot of resilience training, which means that they have to go to do these courses, usually in their own time as well, to learn how to be resilient, how to handle stress better. And rather than sort of thinking, okay, this will help your mental health, employers see that and think, well, you're resilient now, so I can give you as much work as I like, and you can handle it, because they treat it as a blank check for burdening employees with stress, and that's just not how it works. Someone can do all the resilience training you like, and if you keep forcing work on them beyond the capacity to handle it, then they will, become mentally unwell, mentally disturbed. And it is, there does seem to be a certain fad about it. It's very much lip service or surface level stuff of, we care about employees' mental health by we let them have a free subscription to this app about mindfulness, and then we make them work 23 hours a day. There is certainly a lot of that going on. Awareness, not understanding, and they're aware that mental health is a hot button topic that people care about. So we'll show that we care about it, but they don't actually. They don't understand why this isn't a good idea, or why, if you do care about it, you should do a lot more than just do a Happy Friday T-shirt and give people a sort of a badge, say, well done, you. See you on Sunday. Yes, you're working. So yeah, there's definitely a big element of that out there as well. Yeah.
Great. And our final question for this evening is, what is next for you?
I'm kind of writing a fifth book, which is it's been a very long road, this one, because it started off as something else entirely, and then the pandemic hit, and I went through several tragedies, and it's become it's been sort of my report of going through a year of grief on my own in lockdown, and what that affects us emotionally and stuff. So it's been quite it's a lot deeper than my usual output, but it's also been a lot more cathartic, and I think it's perhaps some of my most important stuff that I've done. I'm finally the guy who has my journey I should talk about, rather than being Mr. Lectury nerd off to the one side saying, well, this happens in this case. And so yeah, that's what I'm currently doing. See how that goes, I guess. If it goes well, then pursue something along those lines. If not, I'll try something else. I like to juggle lots of things at the same time, because I do get bored easily.
Great. Well, definitely one to look out for, I'm sure. So I suppose, unfortunately, we are out of time today, although it's been fantastic to gain a greater understanding of what is happening in our brains when we suffer adverse mental health, and the impacts of mental health awareness on the overall narrative. So if you're an alumnus of the university and you have a topic that you'd like to pitch for our For Alumni by Alumni series, either a live webinar such as this or a written blog in our e-news, please do get in touch. The details of how to do that will be in our follow-up email. We hope you'll join Cardiff University for another virtual event. Our next For Alumni by Alumni live event is on Monday the 7th of June, entitled Getting Back on Track, Physio and Running, as we look forward to the planned return of mass races, including the Cardiff Half Marathon later this year. You'll receive an email in the next few days with a copy of the recording and links to register for upcoming events. But most of all, thank you so much to Dean for sharing your expertise so generously. Diolch yn fawr iawn. And thanks also to all of our audience for joining us and asking such important questions. Thank you again. Diolch yn fawr, a hwyl fawr. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.